Past few hours in Dahiyeh suburb. That's the Hezbollah stronghold in the south of Beirut. We can see the remnants of a huge fire that's been burning there in that densely populated area. Let's bring in Nour. She joins us also from Beirut. Tell us more about these strikes that we're seeing the aftermath of there on our screens, Nour.
Yeah, as you said, there's been 4 strikes just in the past couple of hours. The Israeli army did issue a warning to say that they would strike a certain number of buildings in the Dahiyeh area 4 times, and then indeed they did strike them. But the problem is people coming from these southern suburbs often say that the Israeli army would tell them they're going to bomb one building and then it would be another. They tell them to move 500 meters away, and you can see by these huge flames reaching up into the night sky, these massive explosions, it certainly doesn't seem far enough. But what we do know is that up until 2 weeks ago, 700,000 people were living in those southern suburbs. They've pretty much emptied, but it's very difficult for people to get in, for medics to get in, for paramedics to get in, see the damage, and also to see if there are any injuries or fatalities. But we've also seen a major explosion tonight in Baalbek, in a small village called Nabi Sheet. We haven't got any confirmation as to what has been hit yet. We do know that these flames are going up into the night sky, but our correspondent Qassem has been reporting from that area, and he said there has been a huge uptick in Israeli air raids in the past few days there.
And that's in the east of Lebanon, Laura. We're also hearing that the Israeli army is expanding its operation westwards towards the Mediterranean Sea. What can you tell us about that?
They absolutely are, considering from the moment these hostilities really heated up over the past couple of weeks. They said that they will continue these limited and targeted attacks against Hezbollah specifically and its military infrastructure, trying to clear it from the border. Now they've got in a 4th division. Up until a few days ago, they had 2 divisions there. We're looking at upwards of around 15,000 troops now on that southern border, which clearly means they're going to try to push in from that southern border. But over the past couple of days, they've also given some evacuation orders from the western coast. They said everyone along that coastline up until the mouth of the Awali River, which is about 60 kilometers north of the border. They've asked people to move away, anyone from the beaches, fishermen, anyone from the sea, to leave. So it's very clear that they are expanding operations. The rhetoric has been matching that. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has essentially almost compared, what could happen in Lebanon to what's been happening in Gaza, which is clearly making people, civilians, really quite afraid. There's already 1.2 million people displaced. With the people now leaving those coastal areas, it's getting essentially much worse, especially that they're struggling to find any kind of shelter.
Nour joining us there from Beirut this hour. Many thanks, Laura. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned Lebanon that it could face destruction like Gaza. Netanyahu said the Lebanese people should free their country from Hezbollah to avoid what he called the abyss of a long war. Odeh is in Jordan's capital, Amman, for us. That's because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting in the occupied West Bank and in Israel. So, Nour, we've got Netanyahu threatening the people of Lebanon in a very similar manner to how he threatened the Iranians just a week ago.
That's right, Laura. It seems that Netanyahu feels emboldened, empowered. He is riding on that high of the victory that he declared 24 hours ago that Israel was achieving. In fact, he not only threatened the people of Lebanon, he incited them to clash with Hezbollah, to liberate Lebanon from Hezbollah, a movement, a party that is part of the social fabric, that represents an important component in Lebanese society, that has elected members of parliament and ministers in the legislature and government. So that evokes or promotes thoughts and memories in the region of the Lebanese civil war, which was very bloody and very complicated because of outside intervention, including from Israel, that played on those sentiments, on those divisions. So in addition to telling the Lebanese people, look, the genocide you've seen unfolding for the past 12 months, that will be your fate if you don't follow my lead, if you don't clash internally, liberate Lebanon, so to speak, from Hezbollah, help Israel achieve that goal that it announced of terminating, annihilating, if you will, that big movement and military component in Lebanon.
Nour, do stay with us, because the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has written to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about a draft legislation aimed at stopping the UN Agency for Palestinians from working. Now, he says the move to block UNRWA's operations would be disastrous.
The vast majority of those killed were part of the backbone of humanitarian relief operations in Gaza, UNRWA. In the midst of all the upheaval, UNRWA, more than ever, is indispensable. UNRWA, more than ever, is irreplaceable. That is why I've written directly to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to express profound concern about draft legislation that could prevent UNRWA from continuing its essential work in the occupied Palestinian territory. Such a measure would suffocate efforts to ease human suffering and tensions in Gaza and indeed the entire occupied Palestinian territory. It would be a catastrophe in what is already an unmitigated disaster.
Nour, we've got the UN Secretary General calling UNRWA the indispensable, irreplaceable. What impact would its outlawing have on the region?
It's difficult to really put into words what kind of catastrophic impact that would have. UNRWA right now provides a lifeline for the population in Gaza. 90%, more than 90% of whom have been forcibly displaced by Israel in the past year. They are being starved, according to the United Nations. And without UNRWA, the very little assistance that Israel is allowing into Gaza would simply not be available. But it doesn't stop there, because UNRWA also provides services to Palestinian refugees across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Outlawing the operation of this UN-mandated organization would mean that those refugees as well would be left without services in health and in education, in humanitarian assistance, in vocational training. And it would also, undermine the organization and its indispensable work, also now in Lebanon and in Syria and in Jordan. So this is really quite unprecedented, and it follows Israel's announcement, or Israel's declaration, that the UN Secretary General himself is an unwanted person, a persona non grata, an unprecedented move, really, certainly one that seasoned diplomats don't remember happening. So in a way, the Secretary General, who's under attack by Israel, is also sounding the alarm to the countries that fund UNRWA and ensure its continued operation, which include countries in the European Union, the European Commission itself, and up until recently, the United States as well. They need to move, they need to change the situation in order to allow for continued function of UNRWA. Otherwise, they're going to have a humanitarian disaster they simply cannot mitigate, because no one can replace UNRWA's huge infrastructure and operation in Gaza, more than 13,000 in staff operating there just in Gaza, Laura.
And Nour, talking about the US, what can you tell us about Israel telling the Pentagon that the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, will not be traveling to Washington as was planned on Tuesday night?
Quite astonishing developments there. The Minister of Defense of Israel was intended to travel to meet with his counterpart in the United States. Now, we know that there's a lot of tension between Yoav Gallant and the Israeli Prime Minister, but it kind of boiled over tonight with the Israeli Prime Minister telling his defense minister he cannot travel to Washington until and unless the American president calls him first. And until and unless Yoav Gallant approves plans to strike Iran ahead of that visit. So in a way, he wants to box in Yoav Gallant and the Biden administration before any conversations can be had, and limit, in a way, the scope of that conversation to how the U.S. can support that effort instead of discussions about the details.
Nour Odeh joining us there from Amman. Many thanks, Nour. Let's bring in Elijah Magnier now. He's a military and security analyst and joins us here in the studio. Let's touch on Yoav Gallant's cancelled trip to Washington, first of all. What do you read into it? Because surely this is a time when there should be maximum cooperation between Israel and the US on many different levels.
We've seen many differences between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who is closer to the American and the Pentagon, and who is more willing to listen to the American advice rather than Benjamin Netanyahu, who's doing things as he wants. This is why we see these differences always reflecting in the relationship with the Americans, when Benjamin Netanyahu is really uncontrollable and not listening to anyone. There is a war that's going on in Gaza, a war that's going on in Lebanon. The Americans gave their blessing for the war in Lebanon, saying just look after the civilians, not many casualties. And yet we've seen Yoav Gallant asked by Benjamin Netanyahu not to travel to the United States when there is a hit that is probably coming also against Iran.
And if we look further at what Netanyahu's been saying, he's been calling on the Lebanese people to turn their backs on Hezbollah and not enter into the abyss of a long war. I mean, as Nour said there, I mean, really, he's inciting the Lebanese to turn on each other, and that's bringing up memories of a very difficult time for the country, isn't it? The 1980s civil war.
Well, it brings to me the memory because I covered the 1982 invasion, and I remember when Israel promoted the Christian Maronite Lebanese leader Bashir Gemayel and brought him to power when Ariel Sharon invaded Lebanon. And that caused also the massacre of Sabra Shatila that I walked in the camp just the morning of that massacre. So what Israel is capitalizing on is just to invite the Lebanese to repeat the same story of 1982, learning nothing from the past, because that didn't work in Lebanon. So inviting the Lebanese to turn one against another in the moment where the country is suffering in the economy, it's under war, devastating destruction. Inflation has destroyed the country and the society, and yet Benjamin Netanyahu, the only thing that he's thinking about is to create more havoc. And this is not surprising when the International Criminal Court accuse him of being a war criminal.
I mean, he obviously thinks he would have some success, that there's something there to be gained by making these calls. Are there any divisions that are emerging more in Lebanese society since Israel began its invasion on Hezbollah and other areas in Lebanon?
Yes, that is true. Cannot be ignored. He can have some success if the Lebanese society is not protected, and it is not. It's very easy to break into a fragile society that is suffering in its economy and war, and it has never agreed one another on the principle of fighting against Israel or protecting the country. And that comes also because the Lebanese army is not allowed to be armed to defend the country. This is why on the first call from Israel to withdraw, the Lebanese army pulled back from all the positions in the south of Lebanon, because it's not in a position to stand against Israel and fulfill the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 to take control of the country and prevent Israel from occupying further territory or to violate the Lebanese airspace and the Lebanese water.
It's a very precarious situation. Elijah Magnier, many thanks indeed for joining us here to explain it.
Thank you.